Video 2, David Ehrenberg, Life in Flesh Becomes Words, Life and Experiences of a Convict, right? So, okay, David, in your 12 years of experience, as an incarcerated individual, tell me what, it's called DOC, right? The Department of Corrections, right? Tell me if you think the system is properly doing its job in rehabilitating and or reforming individuals as they come in.
Absolutely not. Prison is big business, particularly in a state like Arizona. Mm-hmm. It used to be that that state-run prisons brought economic development to tumbleweed-strewn crossroads like Buckeye, which suddenly became thriving metropolises once the prison was built. Mm-hmm. All of the surrounding buildings, the schools for the officers' children, the supermarkets, all the prison brings economic development, and it has brought economic development both to towns that were nothing and also to towns that were dead, such as old mining towns.
Okay.
At some point in the mid-2000s, actually probably early 2000s, mm-hmm. The private prison industry started building prisons in Arizona, mm-hmm. and Arizona started contracting with private prisons.
Okay.
And, of course, the private prisons, which make a profit off incarceration, have an interest in prisoners coming back, in recidivism.
Yes.
It's actually in their economic self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't offer any meaningful programs, and significantly, there are no resources for prisoners upon release, which means that many, 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 many of them get thrown out on the street with nothing and are homeless. They start taking drugs or doing the same little petty crimes they did before because essentially they're given no other opportunity and they end up back in prison. Or they've committed new crimes and they go back to prison on new terms.
Mm-hmm. So what happens? What goes on? Describe a average day in prison.
Well, I can tell you that my average day was a little different than most people's average day.
Yes.
Even on the 3-yard,
yes.
Once after I picked up the new charges and I came back to prison, I was able to remain on a 3-yard for a substantial period of time. Mm-hmm. At that point, because of my legal background, I actually became the Jewish lawyer for the Aryan Brotherhood.
Yes.
And in doing so, I was able to remain safe.
Yes.
In fact, the Aryan Brotherhood protected me from the skinheads.
Yes.
It was a very bizarre situation.
Okay, so
my day was
yes.
filled with doing legal work
okay.
for inmates. That's
okay.
what my day was filled with. But
okay, so just on average, though,
typically,
yes,
a typical day for inmates consisted of one of two things.
Yes.
The higher the custody level yard you go, the less jobs there are, the less time you spend out of your cell.
Yes.
And that means that you spend time in your cell or in your cubicle or playing dominoes or playing chess or playing cards with other inmates. You sit around and essentially do nothing. Now,
okay.
There are also inmates, particularly at the lower level yards, who get jobs, and a lot of these jobs are very, very difficult for which they're making, essentially no wages.
Yes.
50 cents an hour, 45 cents an hour.
Okay, so there's a lot of people think. Tell me if this is true. That there's a lot of drugs, a lot of violence in prison. I know you personally have experienced a lot of violence, but on average, what do you say about that?
There are a fair amount of drugs there.
Yeah.
The main drug of choice, I would say, it used to be heroin.
Yes.
And then around the end of my tenure, I think spice started taking over. That's sort of a substitute marijuana.
Okay.
So there was a fair amount of drugs. I wouldn't say that, I can't even estimate what percentage of the population took drugs. It wasn't that high a percentage, but there was, a significant population that took drugs.
Okay, so did you make any friends in prison?
I did. You're one of them.
Yes. Okay. So tell me about, okay, so 100% of the prison population. Tell me the percentage, in your opinion, are actually low lives that really need to be there, and the percentage, in your opinion, you think that given the proper resources, could actually do something different.
Well, I have a perspective, which is that nobody should be in prison except people who are an actual danger to society, who pose an immediate threat. The reason is that I think that it's not a fair trade. Property, if you steal something, it can be replaced. Time can't. The eye for an eye doesn't work.
Yes.
That's my personal feeling.
Okay, but without getting into a
philosophical
debate, I mean, I just,
But there's a lot of people in prison who come from very poor backgrounds, who come from the ghetto.
Yeah.
People whom the society has no use for.
Yes.
Again, to get a little philosophical, during the 60s, when there was high production, you needed to maintain a reserve army of the unemployed so that during periods of high production, you could, bring workers into the workforce.
Mm.
So you have to sort of sustain that population during the periods of low production,
Yes.
so they could be available. But in an economy such as the one we have now, there no longer is any use for this reserve army of the unemployed, and therefore there are no more social services and there's no educational opportunities available to them.
Yes.
And so, as the social services network and structures have, started to dissolve in society since Ronald Reagan, the prison population has gone up.
Okay.
And many of the people who are in the prison population are uneducated and products of
So it sounds like to me that you're saying that many of the people in prison are themselves victims.
Oh, absolutely. There's no
Okay.
question about it. Most of the people in prison, I would say, are victims in one way or another.
And give us an example. Just one that you may have came across in your 12 years.
There was a guy named John.
Yeah.
He was on a 3-yard. He was a meth addict.
Yes.
He was a nice enough guy. He wasn't too bright.
Yes.
He had quite a few. He had been in and out of prison numerous times.
Yes.
So that when he was in prison this time, he got a substantial sentence.
Yes.
But what the actual crime was stealing a bicycle
Yes.
from a yard.
Yes.
That's what he got arrested for.
Yes.
You know.
So he was,
I mean, he wasn't a violent guy.
Yeah.
It was a very, very low-level crime. I don't remember why he stole the bicycle, but,
Yeah.
he was just a guy who crawled around looking for methamphetamine and, it's kind of a pathetic person, really.
Yes.
And he got something like 10 years or 12 years for stealing a bicycle.
Yes. Okay, so listen, we're gonna stop here for video 2. We will come back shortly for video 3 of David Ehrenberg.
After these brief messages.
Yeah, David Ehrenberg, Flesh Becomes Words, Life and Experiences of a Convict.